everybody. I'm Beatty Redos, and welcome again to the Ask Beatty Show. And it is really the truth, my friends, that we do not need to navigate the challenges of life on our own. And it really is a great idea when we're starting to feel that our lives and our relationships are getting out of control, that we actually give ourselves permission to reach out and ask for help. Of course, that means asking for good help. Because look at what is going on in the country right now. So much has been exacerbated as a result of the coronavirus. I mean, issues of unemployment, people losing their businesses. You know, this morning I had to go to my chiropractor. I pulled something actually on the tennis courts several weeks ago. And as the Via driver was driving down the various different streets in New York City, on Columbus Avenue, on Madison Avenue, main streets, store after store after store had for lease signs. Businesses obviously have gone out of business. People have lost their jobs. The concern about daycare. How am I going to manage taking care of my children and still trying to, either if I'm lucky enough to have a job, to keep a job, especially if I'm not able to work from home? And then we have to look at the depression numbers in this country. 16 million adults in the United States, which translates into approximately 1 in 5 Americans are suffering from depression. And even though I cite to this statistic every single week, I know that those numbers have gone up, certainly since the coronavirus has been a part of our lives since March. 40 million adults in this country are suffering from a variety of anxiety disorders. And of course, need I remind you of what is going on in the world of relationships? The divorce rate for first marriages is 48%. For second marriages, that number is 67%. And one would hope, and one would think that maybe we've all learned something if we made a mistake in our first marriage or we made a mistake in our second marriage. But the divorce rate for third marriages is 74%. And of course, those of you who've been listening to the Ask Beatty show now, in fact, today is the 306th Ask Beatty show that I have been hosting here on the Progressive Radio Network. And I am more convinced today than I have ever been that if we are ever hoping to have a successful relationship and to stop domestic violence before it starts so that we're never going to make a mistake in love again, there are 3 things that we have to do, and they're not sexy and they're not fun. But we do need to get ourselves into a really good place emotionally and mentally and psychologically and psychiatrically and deal, unfortunately, but there's a reality here with our old issues, our unfinished business, what I call the skeletons in the closet, stemming from our own family of origin, the abuse of various different kinds, including sexual abuse and sexual assault and verbal and physical and emotional abuse and substance abuse. And the fact is that we can't change our history, but with really good therapy, we are able, and I have treated thousands of people over the past 35 years, and what I have learned and what I have found is that we can help people to emotionally work through what did and did not happen in their lives so that once and for all, they are finally able to live their lives without having one foot in the past and one foot in the present. And of course, that is a choice that people actually do need to make, whether or not they are interested, whether or not they are serious about acknowledging and addressing and resolving their problems as best as we can. And this does not mean, at least from my own experience, that we do not need to forgive. We do not need to forgive people who have hurt us over and over and over again. And I'm sure that there are many people who would debate that. And naturally, you don't forget. But when you are able to sort things out emotionally, it's really amazing how you are finally able to live your lives more fully, and your relationships obviously benefit greatly. So we need to be in a good place. We need to be students of relationships, so that there is a learning curve here, and we all really do need to learn the ABCs of what ingredients actually go into a successful relationship. And of course, my book and my formula based on my research and book, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And this formula teaches all of us. I wish I'd had my formula when I began my own dating life many, many years ago. The formula teaches us how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. Thousands of people around the world have successfully used it. It educates us. It empowers us. And above all, it keeps us safe. And that is the bottom line. But what do you do? What do you do if you have people in your life, people who you love, who have mental health issues, who have serious mental health issues, and who are reluctant either to get help or they are reluctant to follow through with the treatment protocol? In fact, a couple of days ago, of all places, and this was in People magazine, there was a headline, Bipolar Disorder Can Require Rapid Intervention, all about the illness of Kanye West, who we all know is Kim Kardashian's husband. And what Kim, and I think it was really brave of her to come out, she asked for compassion for her husband as he manages a new cycle in his bipolar disorder. And I have to say, at any time in my private practice over the past 35 years, I would say that 25% of the people that I've treated were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And with really good treatment, okay? And that includes medication and psychotherapy. The people are able to live very, very, very good lives. Now, for some of you who may not know, and we throw the term, you look like you're bipolar today, but bipolar disorder is a mood disorder that can involve episodes of mania, of hypomania, and depression. And bipolar disorder, as far as we know, it's likely genetic, though researchers have not been able to identify exactly which genes contribute to the illness. And what I have found, and psychiatrists have found, is that for the most part, patients are able to live symptom-free, basically symptom-free, in a typical baseline mood. But however, during the manic, the hypomanic, or the depressive phases, which are often triggered by environmental factors like life stressors or seasonal changes, they need more help. And to manage these periods, and I cannot underscore this enough, if you know anybody, if you love anybody, including yourself, and you have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, patients need psychotherapy and medication, because manic episodes require rapid medication intervention to treat the symptoms. And at times, manic episodes can require inpatient psychiatric hospitalization to ensure a patient does not engage in risky behavior that can cause unintended long-term consequences. And it's often difficult, however, to help patients experiencing a manic phase. When they're in this manic phase, they don't want to hear anything. They certainly don't want to hear advice. So the thing is that patients with bipolar disorder are stable and functional, again, for the most part, when not in a severe mood episode. And the mood episodes do not define them. They are not voluntary, occurring even when someone is in the best treatment. So, it's not just Kanye West who is dealing with a bipolar disorder, but one of the things that his wife, Kim Kardashian, has spoken about is that, and this was a quote from an article that I read last week, is that he does not take his medication consistently. And this is not like taking an Advil, or it is not like taking a Tylenol. With certain conditions, physical conditions, diabetes, certain kinds of heart issues, we need to be compliant. And we absolutely do need to follow a medical protocol. But the question then becomes, what happens if the person who you love categorically refuses to take the medication, to seek the treatment? And it reminds me of a couple of cases that I really do want to share with you. And, of course, I'm changing the details and I'm changing the names to protect my patients' anonymity and confidentiality. There was a lovely, lovely family that I treated a couple of years ago. The husband owned his own company. There were 2 children. The daughter was 12, and the brother was 14. And the mother was a psychiatric nurse, and unfortunately, she suffered with psychosis. So she was referred to me, and naturally there were problems in the family, and there were marital issues, and the children had a very, very difficult time with their mom going in and out of hospital. But she and I felt we really, really connected very well, and the variable that really was so significant, and let's call her Barbara, okay? In Barbara's treatment was that she was compliant. Of course, she was a nurse. She should know about being compliant and about taking the medication. When she was compliant with taking her antipsychotic medication, she went to work. She did really well. The family, they were able to enjoy their family life together. But then something happened, and she decided that she no longer needed the medication, and that is the most interesting thing, whether we're talking about bipolar disorder, whether we're talking about psychosis, or whether we're talking about domestic abuse. People are not exhibiting all kinds of signs and symptoms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this woman, unbeknownst to her doctor and unbeknownst to me at the time and her husband and children, stopped taking her medicine. And it was the most amazing thing that happened. She came in for a session, and we were having a perfectly rational, lovely conversation about her work and about her husband and a vacation that they were planning to take. And in the middle of the conversation, everything shifted, and she was off into another world. And her family, they came in. Part 2 of that particular evening was a family therapy session. And the husband and the children had told me that the previous evening she had gone into the kitchen. They were having dinner, and she took out knives, and she was threatening to stab her children and her husband. And we went through this roller coaster ride for months and months on end. And I would tell her, look how terrific you do when you take your meds, and, talk about destructive and self-destructive behavior. But the fact remained is that she did not remain compliant. So I pose this question to you, my audience, and I'm sure that you may know or you may have people in your family who are suffering from a variety of different disorders, and of course today we're talking about psychiatric disorders, who are not compliant. And the question then becomes, when is enough enough? How can the husband continue to live in a situation like this and have his children week in and week out, year in and year out, have to witness what their mother is doing, what she is doing to herself, and what she is doing to them? And I remember I had a long talk with the husband, of course, about the possibility of divorce. And this was years. This was not that we were trying this for a week or for 6 months. This had been the pattern. This had been the family pattern, and this had been her pattern for many, many, many years. And when you think about it, had she stayed on her medicine on a regular basis, how life would have been so different. And when I had this discussion, actually many, many times with this woman's husband, he would say to me, we're Catholic, we don't believe in divorce. The children are probably better off having a mother than not having a mother, even though had they gotten a divorce, there would have been a shared custody arrangement. There would not have been financial issues. The children would have been able to see her. But he said no. And I haven't been in touch with this family in a number of years. And you kind of wonder what happened. Did that cycle continue? Maybe she, got a little bit older and wiser. But what do you do again when somebody who you love, who has a significant impact on you and on your life and on the lives of your family and children, refuses to follow through with treatment? It's an individual issue, but my perspective on all of this is that in not doing anything, in perpetuating this dynamic and this cycle, that in fact what the father was doing, the children were much too young, and I think they really had enough of it. I know that in individual sessions with the children, they were able to tell me they hated their mother. They loved their mother, but they hated her mother because of what was going on. So are we enabling behaviors in our relationships, whether or not we're talking about psychiatric problems or whether we're talking about being in relationships with people that are toxic, where there is abuse of various different kinds, whether or not we're talking about physical abuse or emotional abuse or verbal abuse or sexual abuse? What role does each of us have? What role does each of us play in keeping a certain kind of dysfunctional relationship dynamic going? And that's something that I pose to all of you, because I think it's very, very easy that we're continually blaming other people for our woes. But at some point, we need to stop. We need to be introspective. We have to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, what role are we playing in keeping this dysfunctional, toxic and at times dangerous, destructive, self-destructive relationship going. And these are these are not fun things to be talking about, but these are things that I really do want you to consider. And there's another case that I dealt with last year here in New York City, and that's called the woman Marilyn. She's a physician, and let's call her husband David. He's a financial guru. They had many, many, many marital woes even before they got married. And the woman who told me they subsequently got a divorce, she said, look, all the signs and all the red flags were there for both of us, but we decided that we were going to move forward anyways. And they paid, and their children paid, a very, very heavy price. But this is a very interesting case. I started to work with the couple. The husband had his own individual therapist here in New York City. The wife had her own individual therapist in New York City as well. So they came to me because they wanted to see, although the husband was very reluctant, very, very reluctant in coming to see a marital therapist. They had talked about divorce for years. They had been married only for 12 years, and I think that throughout most of the marriage, they were talking about how to end the marriage. So anyways, we have our initial session, and what I like to do is we had his agenda, we had her agenda. I found out about the history of this relationship, which of course had been very, very rocky even before they actually got married. And I wanted them to be able to start to talk together in my presence, in my office here on the Upper West Side in New York City, and see where this could take us, because the threat of divorce had been there for, as I said, throughout most of the marriage. So we had probably a 2 or 3 hour session, which is the way I like to work. What I have found over the past 35 years, if people are able to and if people are motivated, the long sessions are a game changer. It is absolutely amazing how much you're able to get done if you're with people for a couple of hours versus being with people for 45 or 50 minutes. So it was a pretty good session, and they left, and they had decided that they wanted to, the next night, it was going to be Saturday, they were going to have a date, and I can't even remember, and they couldn't even remember the last time that the two of them went out together without the children. So they came back the next week, and they said it had been a really successful weekend. They actually had sex for the first time in over 2 years, and things appeared as if we were really on a roll, and there were many, many, many other issues that needed to be acknowledged and addressed and resolved as best as one could resolve the history and their current situation. But you'll never, ever guess what happened. Here they had a really great weekend. She was feeling terrific. He was feeling a lot better. They had sex. Everything was going along. And I get a call from the husband that he is not interested in continuing. Of course, we had just begun. And that was the end of that. And it was about 6 months ago, I received an email from the woman that they had actually finalized their divorce. So I tell you this really for one reason. Number one, we cannot change anybody. All we can do, is encourage change. But if somebody or some bodies are committed to not doing the work, there is absolutely no way, maybe there's going to be an angel from heaven that will arrive and somehow, help a dynamic to change itself for the better. But if people are not interested in doing their due diligence, we do it. in every single part of our life. People run, people exercise, people diet, people read, they go to school, they get an education. They are self-motivated to get the job done, whatever that job may be. And yet if somebody does not want to deal with their issues, there is nothing. I mean, you can beg, you can plead, but after a period of time, it really comes back to you. So the question again then becomes, what do you do? What do you do in a situation when somebody who you love or somebody who you certainly loved at one time in your relationship who is suffering from an emotional, a psychological, a mental, a psychiatric disorder, refuses to go for help? How long do you stay? How long do you put yourself and potentially your children at risk? And this is an individual kind of question. I mean, there's no right answers and there's no wrong answers as such. But each of us at different points in our lives, and hopefully you are not having to deal with any of this, but if you are, the question always becomes, when is enough enough? And you can stand on your head and you can beg and you can plead, but if you are in a relationship with someone who categorically refuses to get the help that can make all the difference in the world. When you think about the nurse, all she needed to do was to stay on her antipsychotic medication. That was not such a big deal. I remember in one interview, she said to me, she said, Beatty, listen, I don't like some of the side effects. So I said, look, you can talk to your psychiatrist. He's a really, really nice man. And I said, maybe there can be some changes, some tweaking, but she refused to do it. And her husband, after, it was over 25-year marriage when I met them, refused to take any action. So he continued to live a life where, talk about engaging in destructive and self-destructive behavior, and also having his children be a part of such a toxic and dysfunctional environment. I often wonder, what happened, really, what did happen to the children. And with the couple, the lovely couple, who I believe they could have made it. And, somebody might wonder, was he having an affair? No, he was not having an affair. There was something about this man, even though they had the best weekend that they probably had in years, that for him, I suppose the family and the marriage was not important enough for him to do some work. And this is a man who was really, really used to doing a lot of work. He was the CEO of a finance company here in New York City. So he really understood about work. But clearly, the marriage was not a priority for him, although he said that it was. So for me, it's not what you say, it is what you do. So I'm really curious to hear any reactions that you might have. The call-in number, of course, is 888-874-4888. There was a very interesting article, always interesting articles in the New York Times, and this was today in the New York Times in the Smarter Living section of the business section. So the headline was, reaching out to someone who is having a difficult time. And that can be very, very dicey, okay? In a perfect world, when you're checking in with someone who's struggling, You may have your conversation in a calm, private setting. But even though these days where we're not able to be so physically present, what do we do? Or do we do anything if we realize and recognize that somebody close to us is having a difficult time? How do you approach them? And of course, it really does depend on the relationship. And what do you say? Well, I have found that I have to be, especially if I'm not in my therapeutic setting with friends or family, I have found that I have to be very, very, very careful. And you might say something like, I've noticed that you seem quieter these days, or I haven't heard much from you. Is there anything going on? Is there anything that you would like to talk about? I've noticed that you just seem to be a little bit more withdrawn, and I'm saying this with love. So the how to say it is very important. Not to say, you don't seem okay. You seem like you've got a lot of problems. You seem like you have the world on your shoulders. Not a way to approach. And I tell myself, and of course I tell patients all the time, we have to really, the old saying, to think before you speak. Now, if your friend is open and is wanting to talk with you, he or she will say, yes, I've been going through a tough time. I've lost my job. I'm concerned about daycare for my children, etc. But if your friend is not open to having a discussion and to having a particular conversation, it's really, really important that you do not push. But what you can say is, look, I love you. And if you are wanting or needing to talk, I want you to know that I am always here for you. And of course, as you know, my friend, our conversations would obviously be very, very confidential. And if the person is interested in talking, how important it is that we listen. It is very, very easy for us to be offering all kinds of advice here and there. But, the most important thing, and I've certainly discovered this as a therapist, is, yes, there's a time for giving good advice. But it's also really important just to listen and not to judge. And to be able to say as well, I too, at different times in my life, especially going through the pandemic, and I've lost my job, or I'm really concerned that a part of my income has really been diminished. To be able to share your own struggles as well. And I find even in a therapeutic setting that can be something that really helps to cement a relationship. Not to talk about your marital problems or, your psychiatric problems, to be able to say, I have also gone through similar kinds of difficulties, and I get it, and I understand how painful it is for you right now. And it's important, again, to be really empathic. And if the person you're finding is needing more than just talking with you or talking with family, you might suggest, and again, very, very, very carefully, that you may want to talk to someone. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about Lori Gottlieb, and of course her book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, because she, in her book, was talking not only about her own psychotherapy practice, but her own therapy as well. And, as I say every single week, life is complicated. It is stressful. There are always going to be ebbs and flows, and yet when you find yourself that those ebbs and flows are just way too pronounced in your life, you need to give yourself permission and reach out and ask for help. So reaching out to someone, it doesn't mean that they are going to say thank you, but it's really important that people know that you care, and maybe they are not going to want to open up today or tomorrow, but just knowing that you are there, and that if they make their own decision to reach out to you, at least knowing that you have tried, and for them to know that there is someone there who cares and loves them and who would be available should they decide to reach out, is it's something I think that's very, very comforting for both the giver and also the receiver as well. Well, there was another piece in the New York Times. I really, really liked this piece, also in the Smarter Living section of the New York Times. The headline was "Saying No to What Makes You Uncomfortable." So I have a challenge for you. How often do you think that you say no, or when you say yes, when you really, really want to say no, and when saying no to what makes you uncomfortable? And you would be surprised. And if you were to keep a journal, it might be an interesting thing to do, that on a daily basis, how often you do say yes when you really and truly want to say no. So if you want to know the extent to how much you do this, it would be fun to keep a journal, even if it was just for a few days. But as many states are continuing the rocky path of reopening, some people might feel pressured to attend gatherings and events during the coronavirus situation before we are ready to do so. Now, does that resonate with you in any way, where people are saying, let's get together, but you really, you're not wanting to. You don't still feel that it's safe, but somehow you feel obligated that you should be the people pleaser that you typically have been in your life, because you really want to say no, but somehow because of past history of being a people pleaser, you are saying yes. But when we get honest about the why we do this, behind our actions, it becomes clear how unhealthy it is. Because maybe you do grudgingly agree to attend a family member's birthday party when you'd prefer to stay home, or a friend insists on meeting you for brunch when you're not ready. And then guilt ends up entering the picture. You say to yourself, and of course it's really a story that you tell yourself, oh, I think it's going to break my brother's heart if you don't show up. Seeing you is going to lift my spirits. But I think you have to be really honest with yourself about how unhealthy it is, because you are not being honest. You are being dishonest. And the why you do this could be because you're trying to control how others perceive us. We're hoping to get something in return, or because we feel afraid, obliged, and guilty. And I would add to this, because it's been something that we've done for years and years and years. But the reality is that no one is born a people pleaser. It's a coping mechanism learned over time. And perhaps this behavior was adopted as a survival strategy because, look, if I can't anticipate people's needs, I can sidestep their becoming angry, upset, or disappointed with me. And for others, it might be a pattern they fell into thinking that if they made themselves likable enough, then they would be accepted. Well, they might be accepted, but they're not being accepted by who this person really is. People-pleasing might also be a strategy to avoid vulnerability, okay? So we're not talking about not being kind to other people. It's just a matter of, and here's the question, are we doing that out of a compensation for a lack of self-love? We don't care enough about ourselves. We care more about other people than we care about ourselves or self-esteem, or are we doing that purely out of kindness? So again, you want to think about when people are asking you to do things, and of course we do things at times that we don't want to do, but if it becomes a pattern, this is the time for some self-reflection where you're asking yourself, what is this really all about, and what is the extent of my saying yes when I really mean no? And people-pleasing behavior, it can include offering to help someone even if you're stretched thin. Now, do you ever do that? You've got a million things going on, and for some reason, you're going to offer to do something when you really don't have the time to catch your breath during the day. Or what about being quick to apologize? This is something that I see a lot in my practice for small things that aren't your fault. So I'm asking you to do a self-assessment here. Or what about feeling responsible for other people's emotions? I think people have a hard enough time accepting responsibility for their own emotions, let alone feeling responsible for other people's emotions. Eating foods that you don't want to eat in an effort to make others more comfortable. Again, asking yourself, is this really what I want? Is this really in my best interest? Do I find that I'm saying yes when I mean no? Is it just to certain people in certain situations? Or is this just kind of a pervasive way that I behave in my life? Feeling excessive guilt or anxiety when you can't help someone, or avoiding conflict and dreading that someone is angry at you. And if you have all of these different things really going on, in order, in your mind at least, to protect yourself, you are going to want to avoid conflict at all costs. And you're going to find yourself saying yes, 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 when you mean no, no, no. And of course the question is really what to do. Because this type of personality trait, where one is overly dependent on others for personal satisfaction, is what, and I learned a term today that I didn't know, is what social psychologists call sociotropic. And studies show that those, and listen to this, studies that show that those who exhibit sociotropic tend to be women, and that these individuals are at a higher risk for depression, and of course I would add for migraines and for anxiety and for a whole host of other kinds of emotional, mental, psychiatric, and physical problems as well. And even though tension and resentment can simmer underneath the surface, When people pleasers agree to do something they don't want to do, it can be scary for them to assert themselves and break these patterns. But let me tell you, it is really worthwhile to examine this, and it is even more worthwhile to begin to take some small steps to change that dynamic. So are you lovable? The first thing that people pleasers need to do is kind of reorient their relationship with themselves. You are lovable and you are worthy of being cared for exactly the way you are, and you don't have to do something or be somebody else to be worth loving. And people, think of it this way, that people need to earn your worth. And it's okay not to sell your diamond. If you look at yourself as a diamond, and I hope at some point in your lives you do get to see yourselves as being something really important and really beautiful and really special and really valuable. And it's okay to not sell your diamond to every customer that comes to your shop. And, of course, it's also about being more authentic and honest, because people-pleasing is ultimately, when you think about it, it's an act of deception. You are not being honest. Not only do people-pleasers mask their needs and feelings, but they are lying. They are lying to themselves, and they are lying to others as well. And something else, if you tend to fall into this pattern, and hopefully I'm going to convince you to begin to make some small changes, and being aware of when you're saying yes, when you mean no, and having the courage in relatively safe situations to try it on for size and say, listen, I love you so much, honey, but I'd really rather not. My schedule is just too crazy, and I cannot take on any other activity or task of any kind. And our bodies, they tell us so much about how we really feel. Because when you think about this, you receive an invitation or offer suggesting that you go someplace or you do something, and if your body is saying, I'm too tired, then decline and rest. And if your mind is saying, I'm not ready, give yourself more time. And if your body, mind, and spirit is saying no, then there's too much risk for you to defy your needs. You know how you feel. It's like your body starts to tense up. You know, some people start to get headaches, and they start to get pain in various different parts of their body. So it's important to, again, be aware of what you want, what you don't want, what kinds of compromises and trade-offs are you prepared to make that is going to be in your best interest? I mean, we don't always get to do exactly what we want to do, but what is so important is to avoid doing anything, and that includes anything with family or friends that is ultimately destructive or self-destructive to you because you happen to be important. And try to prioritize invitations from people who give you the same love and respect. Because if someone is only giving you $1, as an example, why are we giving them $100? How is that equal? And then you have to figure out a way to decline gracefully. And I know that you know how to do this. You know, I would love to be able to attend your party, but I won't be able, but thanks so much for the invitation. You do not need to make any excuses. Thank you so much for the invitation. but I'm not ready to attend gatherings yet. How about we do it at a future date? And as much, here's another one, and I really do like this. As much as I would love to see everyone, I'm not ready yet. Or, I know I typically say yes to your invitations, but on this particular occasion, I can't, and I unfortunately need to decline. Or, I understand you're disappointed, but I'm not comfortable attending, and I know everybody is eager to get back to normal, but it feels just too soon for me. Now, can you imagine saying something like this? I mean, you're saying it very, very nicely. You're not being mean. You're not being short. You're not being sarcastic. You are being honest. You are being authentic, and you are saying it well. And I think that that's the thing, too, that's really important, whether we're declining invitations or whether or not we are arguing with our friends, our spouses, our children. It's the how to say it, how to say it well, how to say it, where to say it, if to say it, when to say it, if to not say it, and how to do this in a really, really good way. And when I'm working with couples, of course, many of you know that I've been in the television world now for, 35 years since my book came out. And for the shows that are being taped, frequently the director is going to say, listen, let's cut this, and we're going to have to do it again, and we're going to need to do a take 2 or a take 3 or a take 4. So it's really, really important in communication across the board that regardless of how we're feeling, if we're angry, we're disappointed, or if we are not accepting certain kinds of invitations, that we figure out the words and the way to say it well. Now, none of this is something that is going to happen overnight. Just like tennis, it takes a lot of practice. So we are mostly all works in progress. And you may not squash these internalized people-pleasing habits within a day. You probably are not going to be able to, or a week, or even a month. But it doesn't mean that you should give up. You want to keep working on living a more authentic life. And authentic means honest. So if you're struggling with constantly putting other people's needs ahead of your own, you can talk with a medical professional to learn how to establish boundaries. And that's something that many, many, many people have difficulty. And I promise you that the more you practice saying no, the easier it will become. It may be difficult. I know it's going to be really difficult initially. So what you want to do is you want to be gentle with yourself as you are trying it out, and you will eventually see the benefits. But I still think that the first order of business is to really take a very honest look at how much you do this, and with whom. Do you do it with everybody, or do you do it with only certain people, to kind of get a baseline about what is the extent that you are not being true to yourself. And I think that would be an interesting and even a fun exercise, for you to do. And what you're going to find may be very, very surprising. And then, of course, if you are serious, it always boils down to being serious about making changes. And, of course, this is something that Gary Null talks about all the time, whether or not we're being serious about weight, about diet, about eating well, about exercising, about sleeping. It takes a certain kind of a commitment. Nothing happens on its own. everything that we do, everything does, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. But before we get to the work phase, we have to make a decision. Are we serious about getting mental health treatment when our mental health is getting in the way and has gotten in the way of our lives and relationships for years and years and years? And until you get to that point, you're probably not going to do anything about it. And this is the same thing when we're talking about being a people pleaser. Are you actually serious? Do you want to do something about it? Or like the couple that I was telling you about who had the best weekend and the best sex in years and years of their marriage where he was not serious. And so that was the end of that. And I want you to be really gentle with yourself in realizing that there is nothing in the world that we can do, not therapists, nobody, to change anybody else. We don't have that kind of power. But what we do and what we can do is that we can encourage people. We can encourage people to say no when they need to say no. We can encourage people to do the things that they need to do that are really in their best interest. And that is all we can do. I'm sitting here in my office on the Upper West Side in New York City, and I had all of this material. I like to collect a lot of articles that I can share with you. And I really can't believe how quickly an hour comes and goes here on the Ask Beatty show. And I'm so encouraged by all of you that go to the Progressive Radio Network archives. And of course, if you have any questions for me, you can leave them on the Progressive Radio Network voicemail, and that number is 862-800-6805. You can ask me any question. We can debate. You can comment on anything that I have said, whether you agree, whether you disagree, because engaging in conversation with one another is so very important. And we never know where we're going to end up when we have this kind of engagement with other people. So again, I want to thank you so much for listening and for texting and for emailing, and I will see you next week and every other Monday. And boy, do we ever need a lot more radical love in this country. So goodbye, everybody. Talk to you soon. Have a great rest of the day, and love yourself, and let's find much, much better ways to love each other. Goodbye, everybody.